Hello, this is Lukman Faily, Iraqi ambassador. Unfortunately, I was supposed to be with you in London, but as you may appreciate with the situation in Iraq, I have now had to postpone or actually cancel my visit, and instead we're going to talk about the important issues of how we can develop our oil sector, but via the use of technology. What we have here is primarily the two important elements which I think can help in enhancing an innovative environment for the Ministry of Oil. These two important factors or sectors, areas of focus, let's call them, are primarily to do with culture. What is a positive culture to create within the Ministry of Oil, and what are the structural elements within the ministry which can help. These two structural elements, as far as my experience is concerned in relation to my analysis of the Ministry of Oil, and I'll give you background on that, are to do with the need to think in an enterprise way, and the need to think in a program level of management rather than on a project level of management. What are the determinants of culture? Within the Iraqi situation, I'm sure people can differ as to what makes the culture. However, there are vast numbers of issues or inputs which can help, our attributes which can help define the Iraqi culture. And that's to do with the education, the religion, the ethnicity, the economic philosophy, and so on. The point here is that in order for us to create a positive culture, in which focus should be on effective and efficient way of operating within the Ministry of Oil, and to that effect within any current Iraqi infrastructure, large infrastructure such as ministries, is that we need to think about what is the prospective culture for us to aim for. What's the vision of that culture should be? Like, for example, do we need to have a blame culture? Do we need to have a positive culture in which time is of essence? There's a sense of urgency, the collaboration, cooperation, and others. These are all good elements to think about. The presentation will try to talk about what are needed. You may ask me to start and say, what's your experience about Ministry of Oil? I personally I was not an employee of the Ministry of Oil. However, I have a background in large infrastructure management, such as I was in Hewlett-Packard, EDS, American, and others in the United Kingdom. But also, while I was the ambassador in Japan, I did an extensive study of the Ministry of Oil with surveys, which we'll talk about later. That gave me an insight. Plus, in all my visits to Iraq, I have had extensive discussions with senior management within that sector, and during the visits to Japan, in which I attended their conferences, I had a good understanding of their reports and so on, but also had an actual survey done by myself as part of a PhD I was doing in Japan in relation to comparing and contrasting an organization culture. And that was primarily about the Ministry of Oil. I will give you some information on that. So the key issue to watch out for is management have to consider all the elements of that society in order to create that positive culture of being effective and efficient. There we also say, as an organization, what are the key elements which can input into the culture? Here it will be the systems and the policies of the ministries, their directives, their procedures, their work structures, and so on. In addition to that, the structure, how the ministries are structured, how rigid or flexible it is to support that required culture of effective and efficient for us to, as everybody knows, with the ambitions we have to substantially increase our production and our footprint on the global energy sector. The strategy of the organization is another important factor to take into account. What I'm saying is that the creation of a positive and effective culture should be at the forefront and at the thought of every middle manager going upward, or even I would say even a team leader going upward. To what is that culture should look like? What do we need to do to create that? Then we're saying, okay, we have that, that's the vision. How do we achieve that? What's stopping us from doing it? Well, there are, the research I did led that there were quite few. Some of them are top-down management. I know that some of our colleagues at the ministry may not enjoy listening to me on this issue, in this diagnosis or self-assessment. But we need to do that. To substantially improve, we need to have a substantial review of our procedures, our methodology, our structure, our vision, and most importantly, what is the culture we're after. So here we have a clear strategy, or how clear is our strategy, how much buy-in we have, how much we have communicated with our people, how effective are the senior managements. There has to be specific numbers put in place, or thresholds defined, or areas to identify the effectiveness. This is, I'm not talking about specific people at the Baghdad or any specific refinery or any of the oil companies, nor South or Midland, or I'm talking about in general. This is a general assessment of the ministry across Iraq, what it takes to transform. The survey I conducted was via creating a website, and in addition to, obviously I had the permission from the ministry, and I sent internal letters by the senior managers within the ministry to senior officials and others to complement it. It was primarily done, I had a target of just over 700 people. I received feedback from 186. And they were primarily, you can see the age, the age is in relation to how long they have been there, and in relation to their gender, and in relation to their actual age. You can see the gap in age at the ministries. And you can also, which reflects the history of the situation itself, post-2003 and everything else. The type of managers, they were primarily senior team leaders going upward. So these were the key people who are expected to take ownership of transforming that organization, that important organization of Iraq, for the Ministry of Oil, for the development, and to become an effective and efficient. The targeted management or organizations, there were about, I don't know, 15 or 16 of them, which are to do with different refineries, different oil companies, north, south, and different functions such as scope, and in addition to the head office in Baghdad. The areas I tested in them with a survey had 10 areas, which you can see there, in relation to effectiveness, in relation to teamwork, innovation, quality of work, but also within each of those sectors, there were 6 to 10 questions each. So this was a substantial survey, talking in details, mainly targeting the managers and asking them to categorize it from a 5 perspective. For example, in relation to how do employees, managers view time? How urgent is that time? How effective do they manage their time? There, the surveys talked about, in all of them, we looked at it from, by the way, strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, neither, have no idea, somewhat agree, or strongly agree. As you can see from the numbers, the ministry has an issue, and you will see that across all the other slides, has an issue of something like 40 to 60% of the organization at the management level within the whole ministry differ as to where they are, differ as to what is required, differ as to their perspective into the situation. So here, for example, in this employee time management, talking about how performance, how effective they are. It's that you can see the difference about 58% versus 11% who don't know versus 30% who are somewhat agreeable. That's a large percentage. Anything under 15 to 10% acceptable, but anything above 10% means that there are a substantial amount of senior officials, middle-ranking officials, who may not agree between themselves on whatever perspective. That means it creates a culture of zero-sum. We need to move away from that. What it takes, I will talk about that. The other view of the survey I looked at was on the blame. Are people able to be innovative? Or do they expect that because they take sort of initiatives, if it doesn't work out, they get blamed? And as a result, they will lose trust in their teams, or the managers will lose trust in them, and so on. This is an important attribute, cultural characteristics required for us to be able to transform. There, again, same issues, 52% between strongly disagree or somewhat disagree, versus then you have about 40% who are strongly agreeable. So there you were saying is 50% of the organization think that there is a blame, or 40% think that there is an issue of trust. That's a very important element to look at. Then the third one, communication. How fast, how smooth is the intercommunication within the ministry? There is a substantial amount as well. 32% agree, 16% strongly agree. So there we're talking about what? Just nearly 50% who are saying that we don't have an issue. Another 30% were saying, well, no, we do have an issue. There we have to take into account what is the communication culture we want to create. People have to be careful, or people have to feel trusting each other and they can have an open culture. Bearing in mind, in Iraq, we know there is an issue of lack of control of data. People are somewhat relaxed about how much information they share. But that's not the issue. The issue is who is knowing, what does he need to know, how fast does he need to know, and what do you expect him once he knows. That's what communication is about. Then you have a sense of urgency, decision-making process. How much trust do they have? And therefore, not just that, how fast is the information conveyed to each other? Is it a slow decision-making process? How efficient is that? Does it help what the customers or their partners or their outsourcers want? International oil companies, where I was in Japan as ambassador, I had extensive discussion with them. As you know, Japan has an interest in Iraqi oil and Iraqi perspective on the energy, global energy sector, and in the United States as well. That sense of decision-making process, in which there is a sense of urgency or lack of urgency, is an important area to think about as to how do we transform. Then we talk about leadership, same issue. Sorry, we talk about employees, job placement, the reward and the responsibility, similar issues. The numbers doesn't give a positive image that the whole organization is moving in one direction. That's a key issue. It creates a culture of zero sum. We need to move away from that, to think about plus, win-win. Then the leadership, same thing. I want to, since I haven't got a lot of time, I would want to focus on another important aspect. We'd be more than happy to provide you with the data afterward if there are interest in that. The other important issue is, in addition to the culture, what structure do we need to have at the holistic level, highest level of the organization, at the ministry, to manage these large projects? Iraq is going tremendous transformation to double or quadruple your production. Nobody has done it in such a short, ambitious time. It's good. Okay, we want to be unique. We want to be positive. Great. But what is the structure? How benefit realization do we take into account when we have a project and the interdependencies between South Oil, North Oil, Midland, scope, ministries, and so on? How do they work with each other? How do the oil companies work with the refineries, and so on? This is important. This is my own areas of expertise. What I am somewhat convinced of is that we substantially need to relook at our structure, to think about it from an enterprise point of view, then to home into the program level. After that, then we'll say, okay, at the project level, how do the dependencies? There are a lot of what they call white spaces between that, i.e., this organization say, this is my responsibility, but that's all alone. Others will say, no, this is my own responsibility. Then we need to talk about it as well. And when we look at the enterprise level, we know that there is big picture, governance, also talking about benefit realization. How do we realize that? what are the highest level of risk and how do we manage the scope of that project. And then we go one level down and talk about the program level, which is to do with controlling between various programs and within the project. How does the program sit in on managing the projects? The point here is that the customer, the supplier, the partner, the international oil companies, and your own management, and everybody else who's involved in that massive industry in Iraq can coordinate and have some consistencies as to how do they communicate with each other, how much dependencies there are or interdependencies are, where people are aware where the responsibility is and the other is, where the other is aware with what your responsibility and others. So there has to be communication. That is important. The program level perspective of it is, I would say, it's a must. Then you say, well, we already have it. What we have in Iraq is projects, not programs. There is not enough benefit realization. There is not enough executive governance, and there is an issue of multi-level client interaction. That has to take place extensively. That's what needs to be taking place. So what's called is benefit realization. Then you have what it takes is some kind of a structure which looks at the risk, the value, the actual issues, how do we perform quality and everything else. Scope management, what underlining at the knowledge and what underlining at the project management or program management, and what is the governance process. This is just a simple architecture for the program management. It doesn't have to be the same, but it gives you a feeling of what it takes to have that setup. Then you have also, let me go back, the enterprise level, which is the highest level. That certainly is missing. If people are saying, well, we have program management, I doubt it, but even if we have, I know for fact, from my analysis of the way structure of the organization is, and this is my area of expertise, as I say, prior to becoming an ambassador. My own background is in process management, so I understand what it takes to have an effective. My own MBAs and others is in culture organizations, what it takes for building culture organizations. A PhD in Japan, halfway through, I had to come to the United States, and I wasn't able to complete. But what I'm saying is that those two areas are crucial for us in Iraq, primarily at the Ministry of Oil, because there is an over-dependency on it within the whole Iraqi government and infrastructure and society, for it to transform, to provide us with a fund. To do that, there are two important areas to look at, or really look at. This is a critical self-diagnosis, which is to do with what it takes to have an effective culture, what it takes to redevelop our structure at an enterprise level, and within that, how do we have good program management to complement that. Let me also say that I'm somewhat proud to be able to do these analysis and shape into the development of the country. And as you can see here you have my contact details, Facebook, Twitter. I'm a keen Twitter follower, and I'm also on my personal email. Let me thank you again for giving me the opportunity and apologize for not being there, but I'm sure you appreciate that. And I hope to participate in future conferences. Thank you again, and thank you for giving me the time. Much appreciated.